Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining Minister Fielding and myself today for this announcement that highlights our government's continued commitment in keeping hydro rates affordable for all Manitobans. Our government understands that Manitobans need stability when it comes to Manitoba Hydro rates. We understand that the pandemic isn't over and Manitobans deserve a financial break. Today we are announcing that our government will be introducing legislative amendments this fall that would set Manitoba Hydro rates at 2.5% for the next 3 years. This increase will come into effect December 2021. This means that Manitoba households and businesses will have stability and certainty as our economy recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's announcement balances the needs for Manitoba Hydro to repay their massive debts created by the former government's reckless mismanagement and keeps our electricity rates among the lowest in North America. During this interim period, Manitobans will save an estimated $40 million that would have otherwise been spent on annual general rate applications. This period will allow the PUB to become stronger and more independent while ensuring ratepayers of greater transparency for the future. This 3-year set rate is the lowest rate increase in 10 years and will result in an average increase of $35 per ratepayer. Our government remains committed to keeping Manitoba Hydro rates affordable for Manitoba ratepayers. Manitoba Hydro's financials are continuously updated, and as the minister responsible, I will continue to work with Manitoba Hydro to ensure their financial stability going forward. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Minister Fielding. Thank you. Good morning.
Thanks, Minister Wharton. And today we announce our plan for a limited rate increase in spite of the huge debt problem at Manitoba Hydro. Our government is working to strike an appropriate balance to protect Manitoba ratepayers as we recover post-pandemic and to ensure Hydro is able to meet its financial obligations created by the previous government's risky decisions. The minimal 2.5% increase will be introduced this fall as an amendment to Bill number 35, the Public Utility Rate Protection and Regulatory Reform Act. The title says it all, ratepayer protection, and that's really the focal point of that bill and our moves here. Bill 35 will strengthen the pub's independence and will move to a multi-year rate hearings, which will reduce regulatory costs by upwards of $40 million every 5-year period. These costs are now paid by you, the ratepayers, which we think needs reform. These interim rates will be approved by the Legislative Assembly, so all members of the legislature will be able to debate and vote on this rate. That's really important. Again, that all members of the Legislative Assembly will vote and debate this rate increase on Bill 35. This will give the pub time to implement reforms and allow the utilities to prepare a more rigorous multi-year review and application process. The new rate structure will create stability and certainty for all Manitobans as they budget for their home as well as their business hydro bills and/or business hydro bills. It will also allow Hydro to better plan as we go forward. Bill 35 will ensure that all operations are transparent and fully accountable to all Manitobans by requiring the pub to review all major projects like dams worth more than $200 million, which didn't happen in the past. The real reason why rates increased is because of the reckless decisions by the NDP government that cost Manitobans $10 billion and create a massive debt that now has to be repaid. The new legislation will require Hydro to develop an integrated resource plan that sets out the load forecasts for at least the next 10 years and propose development of any major facilities within 20 years. This is standard best practices in other jurisdictions and will now be required here in the province of Manitoba, which will be a benefit to ratepayers. Manitobans deserve a break during the pandemic, and our government is committed to keeping life more affordable and lower rates for Manitoba's households and businesses through measures like the lowest hydro rate increase in a decade. And that's important. This represents the lowest hydro rate increase in a decade. Thank you, and we'll be willing to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, ministers. A reminder to our reporters on the line. You will have one preliminary and one follow-up question. Up first this morning from the Brandon Sun, Colin.
Good morning, ministers. If I'm remembering correctly, last week the CEO of Manitoba Hydro said the Crown Corporation was looking for a 3.5% rate increase. Why go a percentage point lower than what the Crown Corporation was looking for?
Yeah, thanks, Colin, and good morning. And again, during committee last week, the CEO had mentioned an assumed rate of 3.5%, and certainly that is an assumed rate. We know under the former government that Manitoba Hydro, their debt had tripled during the last 6-7 years while they were in government. So we know that the actions of the former government cannot be repeated, and that's exactly why we're here today to announce this very exciting news about a 3-year fixed rate at 2.5%, providing stability and certainty for Manitoba ratepayers.
And just further to what Minister Wharton had said, we think it's an appropriate balance, right, between protecting ratepayers and paying for past mistakes by the former NDP government. It provides predictability, it provides stability for residents as well as business users. It's going to be voted by all members of the legislature through Bill 35, which we think is important. And what also is important, it's the lowest hydro rate increase in 10 years. Again, lowest hydro rate in 10 years. In fact, it's 25% less than the average rate over the last 10 years. And the reason why this is we're in the middle of a pandemic. We know the economy, as well as there's still a lot of people that are unemployed. They need a break. And that's why we made decisions like this here today, as well as things like providing education property tax and other measures that will support individuals above and beyond the supports we provided during the pandemic.
I know you're saying it's the lowest rate increase in quite a while, but I know that other government departments like, there's the education property tax rebate going out. MPI has asked for a couple of rate decreases and has sent out rebates. Why not give Manitobans a break by having no cost increase over the next year as the pandemic seems to be winding up?
Well, two things on that, Colin. First of all, we know that during the past decisions made by the former government, that Manitoba Hydro's debt has tripled. So we know that Manitoba Hydro and Manitobans are now facing this massive debt. And certainly on a go forward, we know, and the pandemic has shown us that Manitobans are struggling. We're not out of this pandemic yet. We know that, and we have a ways to go. So providing stability and certainty for Manitoba ratepayers is the way to go. And again, to Minister Fielding's comment, this amendment or these amendments will be debated in the legislature this fall. We're looking forward to that debate. It also opens up the opportunity for Manitobans to come and voice their opinions and make go on the record with respect to the amendments to the bill. So we're looking forward to that process.
And further to what Minister Wharton said, again, it's an appropriate balance between protecting ratepayers and paying for past mistakes by the former NDP government. What this does right now, we know that obviously Hydro was talking about a 3.5% increase. The 2.5% will save ratepayers as well as businesses upwards to $10 million in 2021, $28 million in 2022-23, and upwards of $48 million. So my point is there is savings for ratepayers. We think it's important to support individuals and businesses as we move out of the pandemic. That's what we've tried to do as a government throughout this whole process, and that's what this announcement here today does as well.
From the Winnipeg Sun, Josh.
Good morning, ministers. Please follow me on this rabbit trail as I try to figure out how you guys arrived at 2.5%. You talk about balance, but you also talk about the tripling of Hydro's debt, and this now being the lowest rate increase in 10 years. If the debt is so concerning, how did we arrive at so low of a rate increase? I'm just trying to figure out how you guys landed on 2.5% increase to find that balance beyond just trying to save ratepayers money. How did we end up here? Obviously, Hydro was asking for more last week or a couple of weeks ago. How did we end up at 2.5% to establish this balance?
Well, I answer in two parts. Number one, the way we figured this out, we looked at the rate increases that were approved by PUB over the last 10 years. We went to 75% of that, so it's 25% less than the average that's there. We think that it's a pandemic. We know that there's a lot of people that are unemployed that are struggling. We know that businesses that need to recharge after the business, so this will provide them an appropriate break. What is really important to answer the second part of the question is, you're right, there is a lot of debt that Hydro has taken on because of bad decisions by the former government, Wab Kinew's party, the NDP. And what the Bill 35 does, it provides a plan to get the debt levels of Hydro in place. That's a part of the legislation. That's why it's so important, Bill 35, that we do ensure that there's a long-term viability and plan to get Hydro out of debt. And so we think that's really important. So it answers it into a two-pronged question. People need the support now. That's the way we figured it out. And Bill 35 will ensure that debt levels that Hydro has taken on, which, by the way, are very much out of sync with other utilities, come back into kind of a best practice in terms of the debt loads that they have in place. So it does it in two different ways.
You talked about transparency earlier on. Why not, to continue transparency or to show that transparency, why not take this 3-year rate increase to the PUB and have them discuss it? Those powers have not been taken from the PUB yet, as Bill 35 has not been passed. And I know it's to establish a multi-year process which will go through the PUB, but why not take this 3-year increase to the PUB to have them look at it and to really show that transparency now?
Well, we want to get to the PUB as quickly as we can, and that's what this is. This is an interim rate that was always contemplated a part of the bill. So it will be going to the Public Utility Board. Quite frankly, this legislation was first introduced a year and a half ago. You may recall that the opposition filibustered important, not just this bill, a number of other bills, but also a budget that had important pandemic relief. And so the bill had to be reintroduced because of the delays that are there. But again, this is an interim step that is being taken while the Public Utility Boards modernizes and changes their processes. Reforms their processes, as well as allows Hydro to develop the 5-year plan. There's also work that's happening in the IRP, the resource plan that's in place that Hydro is working on, and there'll be some consultations that's a part of that.
Yeah, no, just building on Minister Fielding's comments regarding the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan. Of course, we know this undertaking has never been done, and it's a very important aspect of the next 18 to 24 months for Manitoba Hydro to work through that process. There'll be consultations with industry, MyPug in particular, and Manitobans during the IRP development, of course. We want to make sure that the IRP is done so that commercial and large large projects like Kiosk and Bipolar 3 are looked through a wider lens, so to make sure that Manitobans aren't left on the hook like they were under the former government.
From CBC Radio Canada, Julianne.
Good morning, ministers. I'm wondering if you would have maybe an estimate on how much this is going to cost for an average household?
The rate increase that we're proposing, which is 2.5%, it's a percentage less than obviously Hydro had talked about last week, will cost an average ratepayer about $35 a year.
And so this 2.5 increase rate, is it guaranteed until 2023, or it may change during the course of the years?
Yes, it goes to 2021, 22, and 23.
Thank you.
From CBC Manitoba, Ian.
Good morning, ministers. I want to go back to sort of an earlier question on where you got this 3.5%, or sorry, this 2.5% number. I mean, Hydro has looked at their book. They say it's 3.5%. You noted that, it's 25% less than the average. Did the government review Hydro's books to determine that this is necessary?
Well, number one, the way we came up with the number, obviously, as mentioned, we looked at what the PUB had made decisions on over the last 10 years. We added that all up, and we came in at 75% of that, so under 25% less than the average rate increase of the last 10 years. That's the amount of money. That's how we came up with the calculation. We know that we're in a pandemic. We know that there's still people that are hurting. We know that there's businesses that are just getting reopened right now, but that are still struggling. And that's why we've made decisions as a government to make life more affordable, things like the education property tax and payroll tax cuts to help businesses and consumers, and that's in line with it. So that's how we came up with the number. We do think on the long-term basis, Bill 35 offers kind of to get the debt levels of hydro in place. There's a plan that is in place to get that done over a 20-year time period that gets to kind of a best practice levels of the debt levels. But let's be honest with you, the reason why we're here and we're talking about this is because of risky, bad decisions that were made by Wab Kinew's party, the NDP, over the past number of years. So we're trying to strike a balance between protecting individuals and businesses while meeting some of the financial obligations that were set forth by some of these bad decisions in the past.
Okay, thank you. So then, if I'm clear, because I did ask, did you review Hydro's books? Did the Manitoba government not review Hydro's books?
Yeah, of course we do. I mean, through our budget process, we have a minister responsible that we have dialogue with Hydro and all our utilities on a daily, weekly basis. Absolutely.
And building on that, thanks, Mr. Fielding, and too as well, Ian, we, again, as the minister alluded to, these are PUB-approved rates. This is essentially the calculations were done on PUB-approved rates. This is where we landed at 2.5%, which is, again, 25% less. So certainly we are looking forward to debating the amendments this fall in the legislature and, again, hearing from Manitobans as we go through the committee stage and that process, and looking forward to again, moving forward with a stronger PUB for Manitobans.
From the Canadian Press, Steve.
Good morning. Without the open and public PUB process, how can Manitobans know that this type of increase is warranted without looking at the books, without looking at what impact recent export sales and export sales contracts have had on Hydro's bottom line?
Well, number one, this is an interim step. As when we introduced the bill, this is an interim step. It's not something where it's a permanent thing. What is different a bit of this, Steve, is that all members of the legislature will have a say in this. They'll be able to put their money where their mouth is in terms of providing a vote in respect to this. So it's an interim process that happens, and we want to get back to the pub as soon as we can. There is a great benefit in Bill 35. Number one, we're paying on some of the intervenor costs almost 4 times what other provinces like BC are paying for it. I think the CEO of Hydro came into the committee on Thursday and talked about a $10 million price tag for every time there's an application process. So this is an interim step, and we want to get to the PUB as quickly as we can. But listen, Steve, I'm going to be honest with you. This bill was delayed. It's probably by the time it's passed, over a year and a half delay that would be part of it. It was part of a package of bills as well as a budget that was filibustered by the NDP during a global pandemic. So that isn't the only reason, but obviously that plays into the equation. We would be a little bit further ahead with his legislation if it wasn't for filibustering.
And barring some very unforeseen and very unlikely circumstance, the bill should pass by November latest. So when would this interim period end? When do we get back to the public open PUB process?
Well, what we're announcing here today, obviously, is the 2.5% rate increase each of the years in 2021, 22, 23. Obviously, less than what Hydro had indicated in the committee meeting that's there. So that would be, it really depends on when the legislation gets passed, but that is commitment from the government here for 2.5% increase over the next 3 years.
Yeah, and thanks, Minister. And building on that, Steve, as well, as I mentioned earlier in one of my responses, we know that Manitoba Hydro will be working hard towards their integrated resource plan, their IRP, which will take anywhere from 18 to 24 months. And the CEO is on record as well saying that they should be ready for a general rate application in 22-23, which ties into the 3 years that we're looking at 2.5% for stability and predictability for Manitoba ratepayers.
From CTV Winnipeg, Jeff.
Hi, gentlemen. As ministers of the government, following last night's incident at the legislature, Is there discussion with the government or the legislature on additional security measures on the grounds of the legislature?
Well, obviously the incident happened yesterday, so we haven't collectively as a group talked about that. But we need to make sure that public places are secure. I actually was on site just after it happened as I was back to pick up some work. And so, I know the police were on site very quickly. I know our security that does in the legislative grounds, they do just a fantastic job for us all the time. But we do need to make sure that they have the proper resources to make sure that public spaces like the legislature are secure.
So that being said, then following last night's incident, if you need to make sure that it's safe and you need to make sure proper resources are there, do you know if anything's being looked at, like bollards at the steps of the legislature or something else? I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but are discussions actually happening about increasing security?
There is discussions. Minister Friesen, obviously, who is kind of responsible for this, as well as to a certain extent, I guess, Minister Gertson, kind of in his role as well. There is discussions ongoing. This is something that happened late yesterday, and so there will be ongoing dialogue. But Minister Friesen is very much engaged in this already.
Our final reporter this morning from the Winnipeg Free Press, Carol.
Good morning. Ministers, after, complaining about the previous government meddling in Manitoba Hydro affairs and putting the Crown Corporation into deeper and deeper debt, couldn't your government be accused of doing the same thing now by imposing rate increases without PUB oversight? There hasn't been a general rate application since 2016.
Yeah, I guess we're trying to strike an appropriate balance between protecting ratepayers, customers as well as businesses, while, basically having to pay for mistakes of the past. I mean, the Wall report talked about the $10 billion of debt that's been taken on. Quite frankly, we wouldn't be here without those poor decisions that happened, because of Wab Kinew's NDP government in the past, right? So what is important is the fact that this is lowest hydro rate in 10 years. It's 25% less than the average rate of the last 10 years. What we do have and what is important about Bill 35, number one, it strengthens the Public Utility Board. It will allow ratepayers who are paying for a lot of this intervenor costs, which are about 4 times as high as other provinces like BC, maybe twice as much as others. It's going to save money in that respect. And it'll also protect ratepayers for things like major dam projects or anything that's above $200 million. Before, it wouldn't have had to come through the Public Utility Board. It will. So there's very much merit that's there. And the third part, which I think directly answers your question, is we put a target, a plan in place to reduce Hydro's debt load over the next 20 years. And that's what's part of Bill 35, right? It's to get our debt to equity, debt to capitalization levels in best practice that other jurisdictions are. So right now, it's anticipated to be about 87%. Most jurisdictions, most utilities are somewhere around 70-75% would be best practices. So it's a strong plan that's in place to pay off Manitoba's hydro debt. That's a part of Bill 35. Unfortunately, it's of course been delayed for a year and a half, but we think it's much needed.
Yes. Reducing the debt is the priority. Why not, after your own task force recommended it and Brad Wall advised you to do it, why not stop taking $500 million a year off the top of hydro revenue in taxes and surcharges?
Well, number one, our government has taken dramatic steps to make life more globally. It's taken dramatic steps to make life more affordable. 2020 tax rollback, so putting more money in the pockets of Manitobans. We give tax relief to Manitobans fairly recently. We've kept hydro rates low. That's a part of this. We think that the process, the $10 billion of mistakes that were made in the past is something why, I mean, let's be honest with you, that's why rates are going up. But we're trying to strike a balance between an appropriate level that people can afford, businesses can afford coming out of a pandemic, but also meeting some of the financial obligations. And we have a strong plan that goes forward in there. You're talking about others' fees and charges, very similar to what other jurisdictions do. If you look at utilities in Quebec and others, all do the same sort of process. Obviously, there's a fee that's attached to it in terms of water rental that's associated with the land.
Thank you, ministers. Thanks, everyone. This concludes our media briefing.